about Shrinking. I'm so excited to hear about your work on the show. I love it.
I'm glad to hear that. I love it too. It was a definite special one to work on.
It seems like it. I mean, it definitely seems like it's repeated some of the magic that came from shows like Ted Lasso. So you shot every episode of the show's first season. How
Yes.
did you? Let's kind of start from the top. How did you land on the show? Did you develop, kind of a lookbook to say how you would approach the show?
So when I first met over Zoom with James Ponsel, who was the director of many of the episodes, including the pilot, and also one of the producers, he and I talked a lot about how this show had, because at that point I just read the pilot, that you go from moments of kind of slapstick physical comedy to real pathos and grief and real human emotion, right? And so we just kind of talked about both how we responded emotionally to the script, but then also saying, what's the best way to move forward in terms of the look. And the thing that I landed upon kind of intuitively, and James sort of arrived at the same place on his own, was that we wanted the place, the story, to feel real. That Pasadena was a real place, that these people were, to keep it very grounded, I guess is the way to put it, right? To, have it kind of naturalistic look to it. And that somehow that just made sense to us, that would be the thing that could be the container to kind of hold everything that the show had to offer. I
That's
don't know if
awesome.
that makes sense. Yeah.
It does. No, it definitely does. Yeah, I'd love to hear more about that. Yeah, I've definitely seen you and others talk about in interviews how Pasadena kind of played an important role in the show, that you wanted it to feel like California, you know?
Mhm.
So what sort of things did you develop to help it really capture the spirit of that city, or kind of the essence of taking place right there?
Well, we were definitely lucky, especially in the earlier episodes, to get to be out in the world in Pasadena. And then as the scripts developed and more stuff was taking place at the therapy office, it just made sense to be on our stages. But definitely to take advantage of that. But then also in terms of the lighting of the sets, and as I mentioned, the therapy office, this idea that there's this kind of marine layer, what I would call marine layer melancholy in California. And in Jimmy's office in some of the earlier episodes, that's the diffused light that's we had coming into his office. He's very rarely in direct sun, especially in the earlier office scenes. And sometimes his patients have a little slice of sun coming in, but just to kind of try and capture the feeling of the light. And there's also a moment when sometimes the sun is too much. And there's a moment in the pilot when Jimmy comes into the kitchen, having been up all night, and his daughter's in there cleaning up after his mess, and basically it's like the sun is just streaming in a very harsh way. Like it's he kind of has to recoil and squint, and that was kind of a happy accident, actually. I mean, I knew that I wanted it to suddenly the sun has appeared and to tell us like morning is here, and that it's I kind of had a sense it would be too much, but just the way where Jason Segel landed at the kitchen island, and he literally had to kind of squint at his daughter. And after the first takes, he was like, oh, "I love this lighting, man. It's so perfect for the feeling in the moment." So that was cool. So things like that, I suppose, gave
That's
us
awesome.
some bits of how it feels in California.
That's right. What camera and lenses did you shoot with for the series?
My kind of go-to camera for the last almost decade has been the Alexa, and in this case, the Alexa Mini.
Hmm.
And I used some lenses that I'd never used before from Panavision that they call P Vintage, as in Panavision Vintage. And they were just this, again, because of the story, I kind of I approach things, each project with a, like, what is the feeling of this story? What is this about? What's the, what are the kind of little bits of humanity? And so when I'm looking at lenses, I tend to not think of it in terms of the technical aspects. It's more like, what is the feeling I get from this? And these have sort of a flawed aspect to them, but they're also kind of compassionate lenses. It's a funny thing to say about a lens, but and that felt right for this story, right? It's like these people are messed up for very real reasons, and so again, it's sort of this way to connect to the humanity even through the lens choice.
Why compassion? How do these lenses feel compassionate to you?
Right. So that's a very good question. And sometimes it's just like it's a pure feeling thing, right?
Totally.
There's a slight softness to them.
Hmm.
You know, so much of our world in terms of the technology and the 4K and 6K, and there are cameras that can do 8K now. And it's like everything gets so sharp and so crisp and so uh, has kind of a sheen to it that I wanted a softer feeling.
Hmm.
So the P Vintage definitely, I would say, have a slightly softer. The colors are a little bit muted, and not all of them match up. Like some of them are a little softer on the edges, so that's kind of the flawed part that I'm talking about, which you can get from other vintage lenses. But the combination, I don't know. I just responded to them.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, as you hinted at, there's so many of these locations, and in sitcoms in general, and a sitcom like Shrinking, there are so many locations that we visit over and over and over again. The therapy office, the house. How do you keep those from getting stale visually? How do you just keep the visual interest and not just default to the same setup every time?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I've experienced that, I would say, on shows where I've done multiple seasons where you're like, oh, we're here again, that feeling, which it just happens. It's nobody's fault or anything.
Yeah.
On this one, I mean, I will say that the break room proved the kind of the most challenging to me. I mean, in the office, it was kind of fun to say like, okay, well, this patient comes in at 11 a.m. So what? And we stuck to a true, sun path, even though we
Mm.
were on stage. So it's like, although even as I say that, in Gabby's office, the sun's always shining because she's just such a bright, vibrant, upbeat, positive force of nature. So that we always wanted her to have sun. But the break room, because there's not kind of a natural gathering place. It's like somebody's either over by the sink. Paul's usually sitting down. Harrison Ford's character is sitting down at the table, and just the blocking of those scenes plus the sort of it's a big rectangle. So that was a little challenging. And I think we did pretty well with it, just because again, it's like you kind of get to play with, okay, this is 4 o'clock in the afternoon, the sun's over here, or let's make it like it's an unexpectedly cloudy day because of what's happening in the scene. Usually I try and motivate what the lighting is to, connect somehow emotionally to the scene.
That's good. Okay, well, if the break room was the biggest challenge, was there a location that was a favorite of yours to shoot? Maybe you were able to keep doing new and interesting things there.
That's an interesting question. Uh, Paul's condo was beautiful. I mean,
Mm.
the production designer and the set designer and the set deck team did an incredible job. And just a little inside baseball, as they say, is when we first started shooting, there were only scenes written in the main living room space there, and which was beautiful in its own way. And then they were like, well, we kind of want him to go in and out, so we had kind of a fake dining room that only had one wall to it that you could
Mm.
see through an open door. And eventually, as this season went on and we got new scripts, it was like, oh, we need a Paul's office. We need kind of a guest room for his daughter to stay in. And then that became this really amazing space as well that told you a lot about Paul's character, but also added to the depth of the overall space. And you just felt the history of that man and the lifestyle that he lived at and the kind of refined taste he had in furnishings and art and that kind of thing. And so it was very satisfying. There are times still after all my years in this business where we'll be on a set and I won't be able to leave because I'm caught up in all the goings on of making the scene happen. And after 6 hours, I'll walk out and be like, oh yeah, that's right, we're not in a real place. Or it's 10 hours later, or it's like, wait, it's nighttime out there. I thought, it's like it still fools me. And that set was so well done that it really felt like a real space.
That's really cool. Um, there are not a lot of flashbacks in this series to the time before Jimmy's wife passes away, but there are a few of them,
Yeah.
and those certainly look a lot cheerier, brighter, more colorful, and full of life. So tell me about how you kind of juxtaposed the visual style of
Yeah.
pre mom's death versus the rest of the series.
Well, you're definitely right that we did some things to like show that there was life in the house, right? There was just more, and Tia as a character, the sense we get from her is that she also brought a lot of light with her, um, and So yes, we definitely had I think the color palette that was chosen for wardrobe added to that feeling. As I think back on all the different flashbacks, it's like there was sunshine. I mean, there was a scene I think where they're fighting in the bedroom, where obviously that's at nighttime, so that doesn't quite apply to this. But the other thing is that those are all handheld,
Mm,
and so we wanted to have there be, and it's subtle. It's not like you're racing around or anything like that, and the camera's shaking, but just to be connected in a more uh, intimate way to that dynamic and that relationship. So
mm,
I think that just in a subtle way, maybe the audience doesn't necessarily notice that, but that's sort of another shift that told us, okay, this is what it was like,
yeah,
as opposed to what Jimmy is struggling with in the present.
that's awesome. Yeah, I didn't catch the handheld. That's really cool. Well, I like I said, I love the show. I love your work on it. Do you ever hear people talking about different streaming services having the same look? Like I feel like I hear people say there's like a Netflix look, or Amazon look, or Apple TV look. Do you hear that? And if you have, does that observation make sense to you?
Hmm. I'm going to think about that for a second. I'm just going through my head. I mean, it's funny because I don't know if it's true, but it kind of is true, right? Like I think of HBO, like even though Perry Mason is very different than The Last of Us, which is different than Chernobyl, and like that there is a certain look. I think of Apple, and I can think of a few shows that I would say like I I could probably guess which streaming platform that show's on, having not seen it.
Sure.
But then I also think of like Severance versus Ted Lasso, and I mean, one thing that James and Ponsol again and I talked about early on was because much of the creative team is coming from the Ted Lasso world. Like we wanted this show to have its own identity and its own look. So I'd like to think that it's distinctive from its soulmate show Ted Lasso in its own way. But I get that. I don't know about Netflix. I don't know if I actually watch enough Netflix series these days, but
Yeah, I was curious. I mean, I do recognize that to a degree. Like you
mm,
said, HBO shows. I do feel like there's something shared visually there, but it's
mm,
almost hard to pinpoint it.
mm,
So I was curious if if you're able to pinpoint what that is
right?
either.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
good.
I'm gonna think about that one. I'll watch more shows.
That's good. Well, I'm definitely excited for your next project, The Idea of You, which I believe has wrapped, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes.
Tell me about working with Michael Showalter on that
Right.
project.
Yeah. So that we shot in Atlanta. I actually went right from Shrinking, and 10 days later went to Atlanta and did the feature for 4 months. And Anne Hathaway was fantastic, and Michael is great. I mean, I had obviously in the last few years he's done a lot of really outstanding, noteworthy work, and what was great about him, well, a couple of things. One is that he loves collaboration,
Mm,
and you can hear that about directors and other people in this business, but like he sought my opinion on script changes, and we would spend lots of time just talking about um, what this like. We took basically what was what could be a traditional romantic comedy, and he's like, what he said was like, I don't want to make a bag of Skittles movie. I want to make like really good dark chocolate. And somehow, like just the way he talked about it, like putting that challenge before us, like how do we stay in this genre? And it actually became more of a romantic dramedy than a romantic comedy, I would say. But he loves making movies, he loves telling stories, and he invites everybody, not just me, but like the production designer and even the script supervisor, into like really intense conversations about character and the emotion of the scene and all that. And so in addition to it being a good script and what I think is going to be a good movie, Anne Hathaway was amazing in it, as well as this young guy named Nick Galitzine,
mm.
who was showing up in different projects, but like he's definitely a major star in on the ascent. And the two of them together have fantastic chemistry. So it was very satisfying on many levels.
That's awesome. Very much looking forward to that. And looking forward to the next season of Shrinking. Jim, thank you so much for your work. Like I said, I love the show so much, and I love what you've done with it.
Well, thank you very much. Nice talking with you. Have a good
You as
week.
well.